Hi, friends. Before we get into the episode with Steven, I just wanted to acknowledge that politics are wild. This is a crazy time, and ultimately, I am here for our collective healing. One thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm looking at relational issues is something that a healer mentor said to me. She said, Bridget, do you want to be in a relationship or do you want to be right? And I think that we as a country could stand to contemplate that a little bit. We're very polarized. And ultimately, I don't think the polarization is going to serve us well. I don't want to see one side completely win over the other. I think there are very excellent values and goals on each side. And I want to see us build more bridges. So I'm having my friend Steven on to talk about exactly that. This is something that he's been doing for a couple decades now, is building bridges in the political arena. I mean, I love a good anger process. I'm not telling you to bypass your anger by any means, but I'm calling the adults in the country to come together and talk about what actually matters in a way that is productive. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of this episode. I'm hoping to spread this sort of decorum that Steven has. I appreciate that he doesn't have a problem with people showing up with passion. He just wants people to show up. And one thing that I goofed and I failed to mention in the actual interview and my introduction was that his podcast is called Stories Sustain Us. You can find it wherever podcasts stream. He interviews changemakers from all over the globe, has lots of wonderful conversations about who these people are, what their journey was to get to their work, and what actually moves progress forward in their field. And this is across the environment, this is in architecture, this is in music and art and all sorts of different careers that these people have. Check out his podcast and enjoy the interview. Welcome to the Five Petal Podcast. I'm your host, Bridget Burcano, a mystic home, hearth, and parenting coach, here to help you come home to yourself through the 5 petals of the well woman's rose. Through interviews and reflections, we explore what it means to care for your whole self, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, and relationally, so you can live with more clarity, self-trust, and rooted connection. Let's dive in. Hello.
Hey, Bridget.
Hi, Steven. So I have a very special guest today, my friend Steven Schauer. Before we get into our topic, which I'm very excited about, I just want to add some context. As we remember our dear friend, Mr. Rogers, he shared the story that when he was a kid and watching scary things on the news, he turned to his mother and she gave him the wonderful advice to look for the helpers. Whenever something scary is happening, if you want to feel hope and security, look for the helpers because there's always somebody who's helping. And Steven is one of those people in my world. Just the things you talk about and where you put your energy, it definitely makes me feel like somebody is helping and making a difference. And it makes me feel a lot better about the world. And also in your podcast and in your work, you showcase other helpers. So it's just a big burst of light that I'm excited to talk about today. I'll read the little bio and then we'll jump into asking you how you're doing. All right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Steven Schauer is a filmmaker, podcaster, and communication strategist with over 2 decades of experience working across party lines to advance environmental sustainability. His work has taken him from Capitol Hill to communities around the world, where he's helped build bridges between policymakers, scientists, and the public, often through courageous, value-based conversations. At the heart of it is his belief in the power of storytelling to connect people, even when they disagree, and to move us towards collective healing and lasting change.
Yeah, that's what I try to
Welcome.
do. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you. Thank you for the comparison or the nice, bringing in Mr. Rogers. That dude's awesome, and to have the greatest respect for him as a human being, and to be just even remotely compared to him is such an honor, and I'm really humbled by that introduction. So thank you so much for your kind words to kick us off today. I'm already tearing up.
Absolutely.
So this is going to be a good
Oh,
conversation. We're going to be real and have some real emotions in this conversation. So that's a good start.
yay. Just a couple of Pisces
Yep.
talking about our love of the earth.
Real stuff. Talking about real life. Yes. So I'm really thrilled and honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, yeah. I'm so happy to just spread your message even further.
Well, thank you.
Definitely. So, yeah, we both share a love of nature, and I talk about my spiritual connection with the earth quite a bit in my work. And I just wanted to give you the floor. How did you find nature? How did you come into it as a little boy?
Sure. Um, so growing up, I guess my love of nature started with my family and you know I grew up in a home that was a little tough. And there was some active alcoholism and some challenges growing up in the home. And my uh, father's been sober for a very long time, but as a child he was not. And so life was a little uncomfortable sometimes, to say the least, as in my childhood. But some of my best memories of connection with my family was with the times we would go out, and we'd go out into nature, and we'd go out to state parks or national parks or local parks and spend a day hiking or swimming or whatever the case may be. So that really started, I guess, at a young age, this connection to the outdoors, because those were the times, I think, where there was some peace and joy with the family as well. Because sometimes at home it was kind of shaky, and a little rough sometimes. So I guess it started, really then at that young age, and was also taught by my parents to respect and appreciate the outdoors and public spaces, and leave them better than you found them, for the next visitor and the next person coming. Um, to not, trash the place, that, bring your stuff and enjoy the public space, but then clean it up. And, I remember like taking other people's garbage and other stuff. So, always leaving the place better than you found it was part of the messaging. And I guess, that carried through into my young adult life and adult life. I can recall in college and undergraduate, my initial degree strategy was I was a chemistry major, and with this vision of going on to med school.
Oh,
And I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon or something
okay.
when I was, 18, 19 years old. That's right around the time, though, that the Exxon Valdez accident happened.
Oh,
Um, for those who remember, the oil tanker that ran aground in Alaska and caused a big problem. Also, kind of happening around that same time period was the Rio Summit, a big UN summit in Brazil. Talking about climate change was already a thing way back then, 30, 35 years ago. And um, so my young mind was watching these things happen and kind of recognizing, yeah, I don't want to spend, the next dozen years in school, and I don't know that I really want to be a surgeon and be indoors all the time. And I like being outside. I like being in nature. That's where I get energized. That's where I feel alive. And with these other global things happening, the place where the university I was going to undergrad had just launched an environmental science degree program. So I switched my life plan from being a surgeon to doing something with the environment, and went into environmental science instead of chemistry as my major. And I remember even then, as you know, I was probably 20 years old at that time, thinking I wanted to be um, like the person in the middle, the folks on the far right that the drill baby drill, and those folks have a place to play in the world, and the folks on the far left that are saying don't do anything, protect everything, they have a role to play. I wanted to be in the middle because I figured that's where um, things get done. That's where the policy happens. That's where the laws are made. That's where we can really shape the direction of our community or of our planet. Was just not taking one of the extreme voices, but listening to both sides and then figuring out, well, here's the best path we can all take together. So that's been part of my kind of makeup somehow for some reason for a very long time. So and still today, that's kind of where I find myself is in the middle, trying to listen to both sides and still trying to find a path that we can share together. So, I guess that's a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question of where did my love of nature start. But it's certainly credit to my parents and to my father for instilling me a respect and a love of the outdoors, and it's something that I'm in my 50s now, and I still love being outside as often as I can. As pictures that I take when I go hiking. Anytime I get outside, I'm outside. So
You took those pictures?
yeah, those are mine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So yeah,
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you said. I mean, and I'm curious about that. Like that seemed to open up a whole can of worms. Like there are people who are on this side and that side, and I want to be in the middle. Like why do you want to be in the middle?
because I think that's where, for me, that's where the real work gets done. There's a role to play for the folks on the extremes. That's the and so no judgment passed on someone who's a far right politically minded person or far left politically minded person. They have a part to play. They have. It's easy to stand from my perspective on a soapbox on whatever side of an issue and scream and yell and just point at the other side as being wrong and I'm right, and that seems to be pretty easy to do. The hard part is, well, where does the work happen? The hard part is, like, I gotta figure out how to actually, rather than just yell a slogan or
Good.
point at the other side and insist I'm right and they're wrong. Being in the middle is more difficult, but it's actually, to me, where real work gets done, where real progress gets made. Because if we just are on the extremes yelling at each other, man, nothing happens. But if you're willing to listen to the other side and have an open mind and dig into the difficulty of being in the middle of a argument, a middle of a disagreement, that's where you can find collaboration. That's where you can find this word that I think has been lost from the vocabulary of many people, compromise. That's where you can find a place where we can all walk hand in hand together if we're willing to. The extremes are important. They have a role to play, but they don't get anything accomplished because they're
Mm,
not willing to do anything to move the ball forward, so to speak. And so, in the middle, it's messy and it's difficult and it's confusing and it's hard. You don't, but I think, to me, that's just where, if you're going to get anything done, that's kind of where the work happens. So that's been my perspective for many, many years now.
wow. Thank you. Yeah, and it sounds so relational.
Sure.
Yeah.
Has to be. Yeah. You have to be, willing to communicate to people that are saying something that might not sit well with you, if you're willing to try to find that collaboration and that compromise.
Right. Yeah, the you say collaboration and compromise, and those are great words. And then another great word that comes up in my circles is co-creation,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which I mean, just by definition, it requires totally different points of view.
right, right,
And then you're co-creating something else.
yeah. And I've found over the years, at least in my experience, my best idea. Like I may bring a brilliant idea to the table, right? I mean, it happens. It could happen. Um,
I've got some brilliance
but
to share.
but when I share that with somebody else, and I'm willing to get their feedback, and willing to have a discussion about whatever the idea is, that co-creation happens, like you talked about, and it's almost inevitable that the great idea that I came to a conversation with, or the great idea that somebody else came to a conversation with, if we openly share about that, we walk away together with an even better idea. So that's there's a lot of power in that co-creation, and a lot of, like I said, it's not always easy, but that's, you know, I think
What do
you get
you
to a better result.
what do you think gets in the way?
Um, you know, ego, people's desire to be right, the and unhealthy behavior patterns of, in order for me to be right, I must prove you're wrong. um so by putting you down, I can build myself up. Those types of, um to me, are unhealthy ways of relationship building and communicating. But they're easy traps to fall into. Self-righteousness. I got that right. We
Hmm.
all do.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think
it's
those types of things get in the way.
self-preserving.
Sure, sure.
It's yeah, very
Yeah,
human.
yeah.
Yeah.
A fear of vulnerability, right? I mean,
Mm.
just, it, to get into a real situation, a real conversation with someone, there is a sense of vulnerability. Like you talked about self-preservation. You have to really co-create with someone. You have to let some of your defenses down, and that can be scary, and that can be frightening, and real difficult to do that. So I think some of those, very human characteristics, again, not pointing a finger at anybody going, oh, you're doing it wrong because you're not vulnerable enough in this conversation. It's just, it takes a lot of, I think, introspection and work on yourself to be able to go into a conversation, to be willing to be open to somebody else and co-create. And not everybody's done that work, and that's okay. That just makes the conversations, I don't know, that much more fun or challenging.
Right. So, okay, you to me, like you look like you're a great leader in this sort of relational exchange. So I'm wondering, do you have any advice for helping other people to feel more vulnerable? Because that, more than likely that somebody who's listening to this podcast shares some skills.
Sure, sure.
And but like how do you make use of them in the world?
Um, Practice, stumble around, make mistakes, get therapy. um,
Mm,
you know, it certainly has been a journey for me. And I don't do it perfectly today. And I certainly, 20, 30 years ago was not doing it perfectly. So I think to answer your question, I guess what I recommend is for people to be willing to have hard conversations, and, you know, be open to this idea of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and that just takes practice. I mean, it's not something, as you pointed out, kind of those human defense mechanisms that we all have. That's not something that comes, I think, naturally. It has to be. It's a skill set that we all have. We all have capacity for it. So it just takes the willingness to work at it, and stumble through it, and, work on yourself as you're working on relationships with others. So it's a muscle. It's like you go to the gym and you work out to get stronger. How do you have better conversations with people? You start, you try, you work, you fail, you stumble around, you recognize where you did wrong, and you try to do better next time, and you just get better at it over time, because it's just like exercise. You get better, you get more fit as you do it.
yeah, I hear that. Like being willing to show up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
such a huge part of it. And
Yeah.
then let yourself evolve.
Yeah. Don't think you're going to be perfect at it. And don't, I think another part of the puzzle for me, particularly, with myself as well as in relationships with others, is give grace. Recognize you're doing the best that you can, and recognize whoever you're speaking with in all likelihood is doing the best they can. Like I don't go into any conversation going, I'm going to screw this person over. So why do I think somebody else is going into a conversation thinking they're going to screw me over? They're probably not. So giving that grace to someone, particularly when you're in disagreement, that you're both trying to get to the best answer. You might be just going different directions. So, rather than put up those defenses right away and have to, fight somebody, metaphorically or literally, just um, give a little bit of grace to yourself and give a little bit of grace to that other person.
Thank you. So you're talking about what to do. And I'm just curious more about your story. Like, how did you learn to do this? Like
Sure.
what sort of skills need to be employed?
Yeah. Um, so I guess my journey here, I talked about changing, degree plans back in the early 90s. And so I graduated with my environmental science degree in 94 from undergrad. And honestly, I kind of wandered the wilderness for a few years, lost. I didn't know what I was going to do after I graduated college. And golly, it was probably 4 or 5 years later after I graduated, I was working, I was productive part of society, but not feeling like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. Um, and it was 99. Yeah. So it's about 4 or 5 years after I graduated. I started thinking I'm going to go to law school because I kind of remembered this idea of I wanted to get into environmental policy. I wanted to be that person in the middle to, kind of mediate between the extremes and get things done. And in chatting with a friend of mine whose father was a big defense attorney in the town that I was living in, this was San Antonio at the time, telling him I'm going to go to law school. He's like, "Why the hell do you want to go to law school?" I told him I got this vision of being this, environmental policy person, and he's like, "You don't want to do that. You don't want to be a lawyer. You want to go to public policy school." Which I didn't know existed, and the internet really wasn't a powerful thing at the time. So, this guy told me about the JFK school at Harvard and the LBJ school at UT Austin, and I was already in San Antonio, and moving to the East Coast seemed kind of bonkers, but going to Austin was great. So I looked into the LBJ School of Public Policy at UT Austin, and I knew immediately that's where I needed to go, and they let me in. So that was I had that imposter syndrome going on at the time. Like, I don't know why they let me in here, but I'm going to take advantage of this. And um, so my journey to some of the skills that I'm talking about now really began there in grad school. It was a wonderful program, had some incredible experienced professors, and they weren't just talking about the practicalities of how do you, balance a budget or how do you get a bill passed or anything like that. They were oftentimes talking about this relationship type of approach, that's really how you get stuff done, is you
Hmm.
have to be able to be in relationship with folks, because you need votes, you need to make sure that your idea is being heard and being incorporated into the policy that you're trying to advocate for. um, so it really started there. And by the early 2000s, I found myself working at the Austin Capitol for a while, and then eventually moved back to San Antonio and worked for the mayor for a while there, and really getting some real world experience of being a staff member for highly placed elected officials, and seeing how they navigate relationships, and
So
how
mentorship. has
Yeah,
been big
just
for you?
seeing how it got done. Um,
Yeah.
so that was a big part of it. But over the years, you know, shortly thereafter, I found myself in recovery. And some of the work in recovery really is the next big part of my story. Is That's where I really started to do self-examination. That's where I really started to get a hold of myself and what was going on inside my brain. And I've been in recovery now for, almost 20 years. And a lot of work has been done over these last 2 decades on myself. And that's a big part of what I've learned over the years, between the practical experience of seeing politics in action, but then the more personal and emotional driven work that done in recovery. Those two things combined have really helped shape my approach to the career that I've been in. And most of my career, most of the last, 20 of the last 25 years, I've worked for governments in a external communications position, where my job was to communicate with elected officials and the residents and the media. And to be successful at that job, I have to work with both parties, right? I mean, I can't be an advocate for a particular policy direction or for a particular project and only want to work with those who agree with me.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so, really for the last 20 years or so, I've been in a career position where my job literally requires me to um, speak to all sides, and then speak to residents who, may not have a political opinion about it, but they have their perspective on what their taxes being spent on. And so really coming from this position of not necessarily neutrality, because I'm pushing a project or pushing a policy, but coming from this position of openness, that I'm trying to build as large a coalition as I can, to all get behind the same project or the same idea, um, so that we can get something accomplished. And I'm really grateful to have been part of some incredibly successful projects, globally recognized ecosystem restoration projects
Wow.
in the state of Texas, right? I mean, you think of
Yeah.
Texas as
Yeah.
this, kind of red leaning, right leaning political state, which it is. And in the heart of that state, I worked on one of the largest urban ecosystem restoration projects in the nation that was awarded global recognition for what it was accomplishing in this state, where you think about ecosystem, like I traveled the world talking about this project, and people would quote like, "You're doing this in Texas?
That's
Like,
so
how are you doing
powerful.
that?"
Yeah.
And we did it by coalition building, by inviting everyone into the party.
Oh
and
my goodness.
and,
Yeah.
and those who are more on the maybe right side of the political spectrum, demonstrating to them the economic benefits of these projects, and the job benefits of these projects, and things of that nature. And those who might be more left leaning, yeah, talking about the ecosystem restoration and what we were going to do for the water quality, and the riparian habitat that was going to be restored for the birds and things like that. But we're all trying to get to the same goal. It's how do you speak to people about that? And you talked in my introduction about the power of storytelling, and that's my experience is how do you the language you use, how do you choose to speak to somebody? And it's not disingenuous to talk to the Republican politician about economics and
Right.
then go to the Democratic politician and talk to them about environmental justice, um, when they're both tied to the same project. They're benefits that are both going to happen with this one project getting done. So it's not that you're telling, one person the truth and another person an untruth. You're telling them both the truth, but you're telling them and encouraging them to see the story that resonates more with them, so that they'll support the project. Um, so, it's kind of how you build coalitions um, the truth matters. You have to stand on the truth, but there's a lot of truths in these projects. If you're doing them right, big project should have multi benefits if you're really doing it right. So you talk about the multi benefits that matter to those who are listening. You meet people where they are, listen to their stories, hear what they have to say, and then find that common ground to stand on.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I just wanted to come back. You said something really potent. You said, I'm not, well, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not
Sure.
neutral, but I am open.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get like, yeah, I work really well with short little mottos. So I'm keeping that one. I'm not neutral, but I am open. That's such a
Yeah.
collaborative but empowered sort of motto to have.
Yeah. I'm glad that it resonated with you because I agree. I mean, I think it is um, kind of a driving way that I look at the world. I get to have an opinion, right? I get to have my perspective on something. Um, but man, it makes getting things accomplished a whole lot easier if I'm open to other people's ideas and can bring them along and use their ideas, not just like, check a box kind of open, like, oh, I met with this person, check the box. I don't really care what they said, but, I met with them. That's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
When you're actually truly open to what the person has to share and again, listening intently for where we can stand together, where we can find, common ground together, to get to a common goal. You know, that's where the magic happens for me. And, you can't, in my opinion, do that on the extremes again, because you've already shut the other person out because you're not willing to listen to them because you're right and they're wrong.
Right.
Um, so I don't know that I'm neutral in almost anything because we have opinions, we have, our desires, but being neutral and open seems to get things done.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a phrase I've heard, unless you see the entire situation with compassion, you don't see the entire situation.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. This is so good. Thank
yeah,
you. And this work that you do on the macro level, I mean, I think that a lot of my listeners can relate to it on the micro level. I work, I'm firmly in the home and hearth sort
yeah,
of posterity industry,
yeah,
industry. It's outside of industry. It's everybody has a home and hearth and a
absolutely.
family and a community, I should hope. Um, and so I just think this is so useful for anything, any group of people that needs to work together to accomplish something, and there's always going to be different levels of authority with some, maybe it's age or who earns the money or who's strongest or whatever.
Yeah,
uh and then, yeah, and then when we can unite on a common goal, that's the magic. Absolutely.
yeah. Well, sure, certainly families have common goals, right? I mean, so this type of approach is, how, Ashley and I, my wife and I, how we try to approach each other, with love and kindness and compassion. Like you said, that's such a powerful way of connecting with people is through empathy and compassion. And those sometimes are viewed as like weak words or and to me our power as humans come from vulnerability and empathy and compassion. That's We're social creatures, right? We're not meant to live this world alone. We cannot accomplish things solely by ourselves. And it's a mythology that we do, that, we're all put ourselves up by our bootstraps and self-made, people. That's not that's not real. That's not how it works.
Mhm.
We require connection. We are hardwired in our brains to be in community. And whether that community is your family or your neighborhood or your city or whatever, we're social creatures. And this hardwiring of a need to belong, to feel like we belong, to feel like we're part of, to feel like we matter, our voices matter, and that we have safe places to communicate openly. That is incredibly important for us, and in a world of social media that purports to bring us together when it's really not. It's pushing us further and further apart. These skill sets of talking to each other, as I mentioned earlier, we all have. We just have to practice them. And they serve whether I'm speaking with my wife or I'm speaking with an elected official at the Capitol. I mean, it's the same kind of concept of openness and the sense of belonging that we're all desperately searching for as a human. We all want to feel like we belong somewhere, and there's power in that when you're opening the door for someone to come and be part of a conversation, be that co-creator that you talked about, that language that
Mhm.
we get there through openness. We can't co-create if we've closed the door on somebody else's opinion.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it works very much in family situations as well as in corporate or business or politics. It's the same, I think, fundamental human drive and desires that we all have kind of baked into our brains.
Yeah. Yeah. In your work and how you're talking about this, it reminds me a lot of this guy who I've been really into lately. His name is Kaizen Asiedu. Do you know who he is?
I
Have
don't,
you
but
heard?
I'm gonna have to look into that now. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll send you some
please.
stuff. Yeah, and he's a life coach, and he just like appeared on like Pierce Morgan talking about policy. Like he's really getting involved in politics, political commentary, and
Okay,
he teaches people how to have these difficult conversations, and
I'll
he
check it
shares
out.
like debate tactics and stuff, but from a really like the same kind of vibe as what you're
Yeah,
having. A point that he makes is when you're in a debate, and it could be informal or whatever, to try to listen more than you speak, and then reflect back what you hear, and you don't have to agree with the person, but just that act of hearing, it's like at least you know what you're talking about if you can
yeah,
really listen to this other person. And I know just in my conversations with you that seems to be something that you do with constituents and everything, just to make sure that you're hearing what they have to say before you respond. Could you talk a little more about that?
sure. Well,
Maybe tell a story.
yeah. Well, I think that's incredible advice, great advice, and I'd look forward to you sending me information about this other person. I want to dive deeper into what they're sharing, but um, so I've learned in my experience and in some of the coaching and teaching that I've experienced in my life, the difference between hearing and listening. Um, you know, Hearing is the kind of the physical act of I can hear that you were talking. I might not have understood anything you said. You might have sounded like the mother from Peanuts, the wah 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 wah.
Right.
Like I can hear that. So you, so if you're speaking to me and I'm not giving you my attention, I'm not paying attention to the words you're saying and the meaning you're putting behind those words because I'm really watching the TV over here or looking at a bird flying over here or
Mhm.
looking at you and just lost in my own thoughts about I can't
What am
wait
I
till
gonna
I can
respond?
say
Yeah,
right, right,
right.
which we're all guilty of, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's hearing. I
Hmm.
heard I heard words, but I was not listening to you because I was building up my argument to attack you back. Um, Listening is this act of Like, no, I'm giving you my attention and I'm listening to the words that you're saying and the meaning that you're putting behind those words. And as this other person that you mentioned shared, that active listening requires that, in my understanding, that reflection. You don't have to parrot exactly word for word what this person said. That can be kind of annoying and condescending, depending on the context. But when I listen to you, I can absorb it and share back to you, so what I think you're saying is this, and I can repeat back to you that you talked about this person who was just interviewed on Piers Morgan, and you're really moved by this person, and you're really interested, and you want to share that person's information with me. Those aren't the words you said, but that's a reflection that I was listening to what you said, and that there's magic that happens in that because again that makes the person that you're speaking with feel validated, feel like they were heard because they were. You might not agree with the person, as the other gentleman pointed out. You don't have to agree with that person, but that reflection of I'm showing you I'm listening to what you have to say indicates you're important. You're a human that I'm speaking with, and you have value. That I was paying attention because our attention is incredibly valuable. It's one of the things we have to share and give to other people or not.
Hmm.
So when I listen to you intently and can reflect back to you what I believe I heard you say, um, there's that connection that's made. That again, we're looking for belonging. We're looking for someone who's not dismissive of us, even if we disagree. I'm not dismissive. I'm listening to you and I'm giving you my attention and giving you value as a human sharing something with me. So yeah, I love that that's a message that the person's sharing. So I think it's incredibly important on building that connection that gets us to common ground where we can walk together, even if we're in disagreement.
Exactly. Exactly. Where we can walk together and actually build something together. There is no building if you're like this.
Right. Precisely. Yeah.
People with the audio and not the video. I'm making a lot of hand gestures to illustrate my point.
Showing the
I'm a
parting of the
dancer.
sea.
Yeah. As opposed to the stacking. We are
Exactly.
building, understanding.
Right. Right.
Do we agree on
Precisely.
this? Is this a fact? Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
even if we disagree, we can still build together. That's something that I think is lost in
Right.
conversations, and that if you're not in complete agreement with me, well, then we can't do anything together. And there may be circumstances where that's relevant. There may
Hmm.
be situations around health and safety and other things where that absolutely needs to be the case. That if we're not in agreement around X, Y, or Z issues, we're not. I'm not safe. You're not. This is not safe. And so I'm not saying in all situations, if you're in disagreement, you can just stick with it anyway. I think in situations of personal safety and or familial safety or whatever the case may be, there's times to walk away from a conversation if you're not in agreement. However, in many conversations, that are particularly policy driven conversations or family discussions about budgets, whatever these relationships may be, being in a disagreement doesn't mean we still can't find a place to stand together and build something on. So I think that's an important part of my way of seeing the world, for if that matters.
Oh, obviously it does. I asked you here. Thank you. Yeah, and I just think of like distilling it into the most like fundamental human experience and thinking like it's this combination of being in touch with myself to know like what do I really need from this? Like what if I have to ask for one simple thing, what am I really asking for?
Yeah,
And what is this other person really asking for?
yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it there, and I think that resonates for me whether I'm speaking with Ashley about family stuff, or whether I'm speaking to an elected official about a policy, or a budget or a project we're trying to move. It's what is the thing I'm looking to get that's most important out of this conversation, and what is it that they're looking, the other person, my wife, whoever, what are they looking for? And when that's clear, and importantly also articulated, because it doesn't matter if it's just in my head, if I'm not sharing that with the other person and encouraging them to share their needs. I'm not really good at mind reading, and most people aren't. So we have to articulate our needs and our positions on things, so that we can find, oh, we actually kind of do want the same thing. Or, yeah, we don't really want the same thing, but, maybe we can, still find, some places to work together. And, some cases, like I said, we really don't want the same thing here. And I wish you well and go about my day. So,
Right. And
but yeah,
there's, hopefully room for both of us in the world.
absolutely. Absolutely. There should be. It's a big world. It's a small world, but it's
Right.
a big world. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So okay, one thing, um, one thing that I find really exciting about this time in history,
Hmm.
2000, spring of 2025, is there are a lot of people feeling mobilized to make the world a better place.
Hmm.
Um, and there, it also, and it comes with all of these things that we're talking about, like shouting over each other and being on an extreme side and resist everything from the other side.
Yeah. Both sides are, that's the message of both sides right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But here's the thing, at least we're not sleeping,
That's true. I agree. Yeah. There's a
you
lot
know?
of energy in the world right now. There's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, on all sides of the spectrum. But I think there's a lot of potential for creative energy in the world right now as well, because as I think you're referring to, people are awake, people are paying attention.
Yes, in
Yeah.
ways that they would not be,
Right.
no matter what the actual problems are. Like a lot of these problems have been around for a long time, and
Sure.
maybe people just weren't really cued in.
Sure.
So that's something that I'm really excited about, is like, yes,
Yeah.
show up. Let's
Yeah.
talk about this. Good, good. So for somebody listening who is maybe new to having politically driven conversations about policy and things like this, can you give a little advice on, like, maybe, I don't know, a book to read or some concepts to get them started?
Sure. Um, well, from my years of, just practical experience in and around government and politics and politicians, um, your voice matters. Um, you know, we're often, I think, bombarded with news stories and messaging that it seems like you don't matter. Your voice, the problem's too big. Whatever X problem is, fill in the blank,
Mm,
whatever that, thing that you're worried about is, or concerned about is, or have a passion about, that it's too big. And my experience is that every individual voice matters. You have, power in your voice. Use it. Make sure you're uh, contacting the elected officials who are there, with the intent of supposedly serving you. So whether you think they are or not, that's what their job description entails. So,
you can fire them.
that's the process, right? That's
Yeah.
the intended process of our democracy, is that if you don't like what somebody's doing, which gets to the other point. Is like, well, you got to go vote, right? You got to participate in. You can't, sit back in a corner somewhere and say, well, they're not doing anything. But you're also not getting engaged. So be engaged, and I'm like, whatever side of whatever policy you're on, right or left or whatever, great, get involved, use your voice, participate in the process, make sure you vote, you know email, call your elected officials, go to public meetings, get involved. There's a nonprofit or an organization that undoubtedly serves your interest, whatever that interest is. So find ways to get engaged and get involved. Every little bit adds up. Every bit counts and matters. And I've seen it, firsthand how it works. That big ecosystem restoration project that I was talking about back in San Antonio, that took almost 20 years to get from idea to completion.
Wow.
And so there was a number of elected officials that came and went because of either term limits or they'd lost their reelection. And how that project maintained momentum over all of those years is the residents, the people saying this is important. We want this to continue to move forward because, elected officials, when they get into office, they want to go do their thing, right? They don't necessarily want to keep doing the thing that the previous person was doing. But some of these big projects and some of these big policies, and again, fill in the blank, X policy takes time to change. So continue to be involved, continue to stay engaged. Is certainly
Like definitely get involved, but and a lot of this, the deeper part of this conversation is like how, like
sure,
what sort of energy am I bringing into this?
right,
When like, yeah,
right,
sure, there's like reason, like extremes on both sides are useful for holding ideals, but like if you're, maybe somebody more in the middle, like the energy that you might bring if
yeah,
you're striving for this.
yeah, um, yeah, and I again, that's um, as far as getting involved. I don't want to tell anybody how to bring their energy, right? You just bring your energy. Your energy matters. That's why, I mean, if you're coming at something from a conservative, perspective, great. Bring that energy and bring your voice, bring your opinions, to me though, gets back to the earlier conversation about bring your openness to the discussion as well. If we're really going to try to move forward, we have to do so together. Again, there's a place for I'm right, you're wrong arguments, but that doesn't move the needle forward. So bring your energy, whatever it
Right.
is, but bring that openness and willingness to listen to the other side. And
Right, the openness. How do we get the openness, Stephen?
yeah,
Like what advice do you have for that?
oh, geez, again, I think each individual has to
Uh,
look at that themselves. I wish there was a simple answer to that. That if we all just did this, it would, you know. But I think that's something that each person has to also, when they're bringing their energy, they have to make that determination for themselves. Like how open and willing am I to listen to the other side?
well,
And I don't know that there's a one size fits all answer to that question. That if we all did this, all, you know 5 million of us in the Pacific Northwest, or all 300 million of us in the United States, or all 8 billion of us on the earth, we would all get along.
mm-hmm.
I don't know that if there is such an answer, I'm looking for it also. I haven't found that yet, but I think, my encouragement to your audience is to do that self-reflection and take a moment to think about where are they willing to be open? Where are they willing to listen to another perspective and a point of view, even if it's hard and even if it's uncomfortable? And everybody kind of has to draw that line for themselves of where they're willing and where they're not. I'm hopeful in this time of both turmoil and potential that we're living in right now, that I'm hopeful that our again, I think our deep-seated human desires for connection and belonging, I hope that that will eventually win out, and that we will find some common ground to stand on. I think it will eventually. I don't know how long or when or what difficulties we may have before we get to that place, but I think we'll get there. I'm
Mhm.
still hopeful that we fundamentally understand we have more in common than we have apart. And maybe that's the recovery person in me, because in rooms of recovery, when newcomers show up, they are often encouraged to listen to the similarities, right?
Mhm.
Because everybody's story of how they got into the recovery rooms are different, and some people had really rough stories of being homeless on the street and ending up in jails, and others didn't, and if we just go, well, I don't have anything in common with that person, you know, then we can't recover. But
Mhm.
this idea from the rooms of recovery of looking for where people we're looking for the similarities in people's stories is what brings us together, is what goes, oh, you mean that person had a different story than mine, but fundamentally there's a whole lot of their story that's the same as mine. So I'm hopeful we can, as a society, find that way to tap into our commonness as opposed to continuing to identify and scream about our differences. So,
That's
um,
beautiful. Thank you so much.
yeah, hopeful. Fingers crossed. I'm going to do my part. So,
Yeah, wonderful. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Um, well, first, I'm grateful. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for inviting me on your show. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's powerful and important for voices like yours to be out in the world. And so thank you for the courage to put yourself out there. It's you're demonstrating, I think, what we've talked about for the last 45 minutes
Oh,
of having your thoughts, having your opinions, sharing them with the world, and welcoming other people into your space to share their thoughts as well. So thank you for inviting me into your space to be a part of your journey, and I'm very grateful for that. So, and that's to your audience, you know, get involved. Um, but get involved with as much openness and empathy and compassion as you can muster, because the world needs compassion right now. The world always needs compassion, but it really needs it right now. So, bring compassion with you as a close companion into every conversation that you have with every person that you have throughout the day. And when you're by yourself, bring some compassion into that relationship as well, because the world needs compassion.
yeah, beautiful. And I love what you said about it really being an individual journey, which makes sense. When we're not in connection, that means we're isolated. And so of course you're gonna have to like find your little way
Yeah.
into connection, and that's gonna look like twists and winds, and there's no real prescription for it. You just have to show up and be willing to be open and self-reflect and do all that. Perhaps with a coach, little plug.
Yeah, perhaps. And coaches are important. I've had a handful of career coaches and mentors that have made an enormous difference. So folks like you who are skilled and have compassion and have experience to help coach others, that's a valuable role to play in someone's life. So yeah, if anybody's looking for what you have to offer, I hope they reach out to you, because coaches make a difference. We all need coaches.
I've loved mine. I know that.
Yeah, I've loved mine too. Still in very close contact with many of them.
Yeah, cool.
So
I cut Steven off and I forgot to come back to it. I definitely meant to. And you're just going to share a book recommendation for people who are just kind of
sure,
getting into this.
this is the epilogue to the
The
episode.
epilogue. Well, maybe I could stick it in. I
Yeah,
don't know. We'll see.
yeah. However it goes. So yeah, so a book that I'm reading right now that just recently came out is a book called Abundance. And it's, since we were talking about politics and policy issues, this is what the book is about. Um, so for those of your audience members who are left leaning on the spectrum, it's written by some folks who self-identify as liberals, and they're pointing out everything that has been kind of wrong with uh, liberal politics for the last 50 years. And for those of you who might be on the right of the political spectrum and go, why would I read a book by a bunch of self-identified liberals? I would encourage you to read the book because you're probably going to find, well, you agree with a lot of things that they're saying about kind of what has been wrong, and then if you approach it from an open mind, you might also then find yourself agreeing with some of the proposed solutions that they've identified in the book. So, again, looking for that common ground, I think many of us, whether we're left leaning or right leaning, want the same things. We want affordable housing. We want good health care. We want a good economy and a well paying job and safety and security for our families. um, we just sometimes think about how to go about getting those things differently. And I'm have not finished the book yet myself personally. But I'm diving into it, and it's a fascinating read. And so to answer your question, are there any books I'd recommend? That's certainly one that's high on my list right now. And I think wherever you find yourself on the political spectrum, it's probably a book that you'll find something that resonates with you. So yeah, that's the book. And
Thank
I
you. And that's
encourage folks for looking
Abundance
at Abundance. Yeah.
by who are the authors?
Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein are the two authors. So it's been a fascinating read. They've been on a book tour, so you can probably catch other shows or interviews if you want to get a sample of what they're talking about before you go out and invest in the book or invest the time in reading it. But it's been a fascinating read right now. And as someone who's been in public policy for 25 years and have, again, my opinions about what's wrong with it, even though I'm in it. I've never been the elected official that gets to set policy. I've always been the the government employee that his job is to implement the policy set by others. So I have my opinion about what could be different and what could be improved upon, and I've found a whole lot of this book agreeable about what's been driving some of our deeply seated problems, and what might be some of the solutions to thin, regulations, and to get folks standing again in a common area moving forward. Because right or left of the spectrum, everybody wants affordable housing. Right or left of the spectrum, everybody wants good health care, and so on. And there's some really interesting ideas and storytelling in this, really great storytelling in this book. So to your question earlier, any books that I'm reading, and I'll just put another real quick plug in as far as books. If you want to get educated on your emotions, I would strongly recommend Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart.
Hmm.
It is just a I've got it on a table here back behind me because whenever I'm feeling something that I'm just like, I don't know what this feeling is exactly. You just flip to the book and like, oh, that's what I'm feeling. Oh, and that's why I'm supposed to be feeling this, and that's what I'm supposed to do with that. So,
Wow.
so incredible resource is Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. Making
I've
sure we
I've heard wonderful things about that book. I didn't realize it's like an encyclopedia. So it's a reference book?
It's kind of exactly what I mean. That's, with her, 20 plus years of cognitive research in and around emotions.
Yeah. No, she's
And
great. I've read other
yeah,
things by her, and I
yeah.
didn't realize that's a
So it's really
encyclopedia.
a summation of, goodness, I think there's like 80 different emotions named and identified in this book, and it's kind of lumped into chapters of emotions that are similar, um, but distinctly different based on the sociological research that's been, that people do into who we are and why we are.
Okay.
She captures all of that and really beautifully shares all of these, different feelings that we have, and explains, why they're there and what you can do with them when you're feeling them. Like a anger, right? We don't often think of anger as something where we shouldn't feel it and it's uncomfortable to feel it. And, when we're angry, we lash out and hurt other people and hurt ourselves because you're not really necessarily managing your anger properly. Being angry is a human emotion, and it's a drive to do something. It's an action emotion because you're witnessing something that goes against your value system. So you can feel angry and go punch a hole in the wall or punch somebody, and that's probably not a good approach to anger. But if you feel anger and recognize, oh, I'm angry at this situation because it is, uh, you know, going against one of my core values. What can I now do positively with this energy that anger brings? An energy with it. What can I do that's
Yeah.
helpful, as opposed to how can I react in a harmful way?
Hmm.
Learning what your emotions are and why you have them and what you can do with them. It's just data, right? It's just your body, expressing a situation to you in a way that you can feel, right? I yeah, I feel joy in the world, um, because I'm witnessing something that's just phenomenal and amazing. Like, this conversation is joyful to me, and I love having this conversation with you. And I'm willing to identify joy as a feeling and experience it because it makes some good things happen in my brain and in my body, as opposed to, some people are afraid to allow themselves to feel joy because they're worried about, the other shoe's going to drop and something bad's going to happen, and
Right.
I can't feel joy. I'm not going to let myself feel it.
Yeah.
So the book talks about all of these different emotions, whether they're the, what I say is the comfortable emotions or the uncomfortable emotions. I don't usually judge my emotions as good or bad anymore. They're some feel good, some feel bad, but I
Sometimes, yeah, joy can be very uncomfortable. Like, that's one thing that I've definitely gotten from Brene Brown. She said
yeah,
that there's no more vulnerable emotion than joy
right, right,
because that it's so intimate and authentic.
right.
And yeah, that's why
And
shame is such a
yeah,
big
such a
deal. It just covers it right up.
crushes it, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that fear of allowing yourself to feel joy because it is vulnerable, and we have those self defenses of, if I feel really good, then it's only going to feel bad later. It's I'm going to
Right.
be disappointed, I'm going to be hurt eventually, so I'm just not going to ever allow myself to feel joy. Well,
Right.
no, yeah, be vulnerable. Allow yourself to experience the joy in the moment, and as she talks about, lean into it. Like, I think you and I are trying to demonstrate right now. We're leaning into a joyful conversation. So,
Yeah, definitely. And for people who are really like getting active to change the world, like let joy be a part of it.
has to be joy, awe, wonder. All of that has to be a driving factor. All those connect us to each other. The you know standing on the mountaintop there, at Summit Lake hike, and seeing Mount Rainier over in the background, that is an awe-inspiring moment in nature, and that makes me feel connected to the world, to the universe, to everything and to everybody when you allow yourself to feel awe and wonder. So yeah, if you're gonna get involved in hard things to change the world, man, if you're not letting awe and wonder and joy into your life, you're going to burn out and you're going to be miserable. You have to allow yourself to feel these powerful, helpful emotions while you're engaging in anger and disappointment and frustration and anxiety. Because if that's all you're feeling, oh man, your world's going to get real small and real dark real quick.
Wow. Thank you. I'm so glad we came back for the
Yeah.
epilogue.
Yeah. Oh, good. Me too.
All right. Bye for now, Steven.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening. If this spoke to you, give it a like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. To discover which of the 5 petals is asking for your care right now, take the free 5 petals assessment at bridgetbricano.com/self-assessment. In closing, I'll leave you with a favorite phrase I learned in Circle. What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and what's ours is ours. Until next time, be well.